So the chapter approved points changes are finally here. Let's talk Space Marines and the generous amount of points cuts that they've received, both in the core codex and across all of their chapters. Hello and welcome back to Warspec Tactics, where today we're going to be going through the Space Marine points drops in chapter approved Nephilim. Games Workshop has published the entire list that you can download for free now, though as per normal they haven't been particularly helpful in showing which things have been changed, meaning it's a painstaking process combing through all of the changes to see what's got better or worse. Space Marines were given a big boost by the Armour of Contempt rule recently, though it doesn't really seem to be quite enough to have affected their win rates. They still seem to be fairly mid-tier, only a few niche lists having a bit more success, in particular things like Blood Angels with their Sanguinary Guard. In these points changes, literally every single change is a boost to Space Marines. There aren't any nerfs whatsoever this time. It looks like they're going for flat out making the army stronger and not holding them back by nerfing any key units that were already good. There's a massive amount to cover. I'm not saying that I might not miss things in this. If I miss anything major, then I'll try and post it as a pinned comment down below, but I think I've got the majority of the major changes here. We'll go through the core codex first. First changes to squads and then vehicles. Characters have largely stayed the same. Then go through all the different Space Marine chapters, starting with the core codex ones, and then moving through to the more divergent stuff, and finishing up with the Forge World datasheets, many of which have received some changes. Loads to talk about, so let's jump straight in. So first up, let's talk about Space Marine squads and infantry. There are no cuts to the troops at all. I was wondering whether they might give us something like 1 point off Tactical Marines or Intercessors or something, but they're already at least fairly efficient units out of the Space Marine lineup, I suppose. It might have been nice to see the tactical squads get similar sort of war gear changes to the assault squads, but they still feel a bit on the redundant side to me. First up though, Reavers got a small boost. They remain 18 points, but their grab shoots and grapnel launchers are both down 1 point, so it means that a Reaver with either one of those will now cost you 19, so a 5% points decrease. Certainly doesn't hurt them, but I'm not sure if it's going to actually tip the balance into them seeing any sort of major play. A little bit less punishing if you do bring them along though. On the other hand though, I think they genuinely have made the assault squad quite an interesting choice. They do remain 18 points at base, but most importantly their jump packs have become free. Even if you were just fielding bare-boned assault marines, that means that you can get a very fast-moving squad for just 90 points. Not too bad at all for jumping around doing actions or bullying light infantry. The really quite fun change though is that their war gear has got vast discounts across it, kind of similar to the guard infantry squad. A lot of stuff became free. If you want to take plasma pistols, you can for no extra cost now, which is good because they weren't really seeing any play at 5 points. A combat shield could add a little bit of survivability versus AP 0. Flamers are free now, though you do give up the Astartes chainsword, and so are the basic power weapons on the squad sergeant, so I think normally he'd be wanting to take a lightning claw. The gear that they can take is also discounted, 5 points for a plasma gun or melter gun, and melter guns at that points cost do seem pretty tempting. 5 points for a power fist over the lightning claw or power sword, and 5 points for the eviscerator. If you want a thunder hammer, it's still a bit more expensive though at 10 points. I feel like in general they aren't going to compete as flat damage dealers with Van Vets, but they seem a lot better as a more utility type unit. Jump assault troops for just 18 points with Armour of Contempt really is very efficient, and it is quite a good fun factor to have some free gear within the squad. I suppose plasma pistols might actually make a comeback. In any case, really like it. If you want a cheap objective doing squad, then they're not a bad choice. Next up, Eliminators got a really nice change. Their las fusils became free, down from 30 points to 25, so a massive 17% points cut if you were fielding them. Las fusils are a pretty nice profile, hitting on 2s at strength 8, AP 3 and damage 3. Now they cost the exact same amount as the bolt snipers. I probably would say that they're the stronger option now. 75 points for an efficient little anti-tank squad that can actually deploy forward and do screening is really good. They're in a pretty weird spot where they're both really tough with their camo cloaks, can deploy forward and are cheap enough to be a screening threat, and also deal anti-tank damage. What's not to like? I feel like perhaps out of this entire Space Marine update, the Eliminators might be one of the single strongest options that were changed. Next up we've got Centurion Devastators. Again the points costs remain the same, but the weapons got cheaper. The Grav Cannon got a 5 points discount to 65 points for the model, so 7% discount. The Heavy Bolters and the Las Cannons both dropped 5 points on each gun, so they're now 75 points and 85 points respectively, a points cut of around about 11%. Centurions got a lot more interesting post Armour of Contempt, get them some light cover, and they are going to be fairly hard to shift now. I think still that not having core is going to hold them back, and I still probably feel that Eradicators are probably a more efficient fire support if you want anti-tank. Still though, pretty solid, pretty tanky with light cover, they're definitely a lot more usable. Finally, and really quite a nice change I think, are Outriders, dropping 5 points down to 45 or 10%. This is the reversal of a nerf that they got in early 9th edition, and they didn't really need nerfing in the first place in my opinion. I'm not sure if they're standout amazing with this to be honest. Their damage is really anti-infantry focused, and AP-1 is worse than before with Armour of Contempt on the go, but I'm sure White Scars and Ravenwing players will really welcome this change. They're far less of a drawback than they were before. Perhaps the majority of the core Space Marine points cuts fell on vehicles though, and I think that few people will deny that vehicles really are the bit that was suffering in the Space Marine Codex. Not having the core keyword hurt them a lot, and loads of them were massively overcosted. There's a lot of small to medium points cuts going on here, so at least they got a bit more efficient and less punishing. First up, for dedicated transport, Razorbacks cost 100 points, down 10 if you filled them with heavy bolters. It still costs a bit more to upgrade them to las cannons, and the assault cannon loadout is interestingly unchanged. The assault cannons got more expensive, so an assault cannon Razorback still costs you 125. I do wonder if they might be subtly preparing us for assault cannons going away as an option in the next codex. They aren't on the core Razorback kit. I would bear in mind as well that in Warzone Nephilim, transports have to have a squad ride inside them if they deploy on the board. It's a change I skimmed over in the review of the chapter approved book. Hopefully we'll talk about that in another video at some point. The Landspeeder Storm also interestingly got a points cut. It's now 50 points down from 55, a 9% drop. These things were already fielded quite a bit just as expendable units to throw onto objectives, but now you actually have to throw a squad inside them to use them. They are a lot less efficient. You'd either need some scouts or some cheap Voids men-at-arms as an allied choice. The other Landspeeders also saw some changes. The standard Landspeeder is the same, but the Tornadoes and Typhoons with the dual weapons or the Typhoon missile launchers, they both went down a bit, 5 for the Tornadoes or 10 for the Typhoons. They look like they actually compete fairly well with attack bikes now I think. If you don't have any core buffs going on, then they're fairly similar efficiency in my opinion. The Storm Speeders though do remain unchanged, so I guess they fall further behind. I think another round of points cuts would have done them good. Next, the Firestrike Servo Turret, one of the most underwhelming units on launch, has got some decent drops. The autocannon version is now 80 points, and the Last Talon version is now 110, a cut of 10 for the autocannons, down 11%, and 20 points for the Last Talons, down 15. I still don't think that the Last Talons are probably going to compete with things like Eradicators, which fill a very similar role. The autocannon version, though, I think is a lot more tempting. With Armour of Contempt, it's a bit harder to shift. Having one of these sat on a home field objective, spattering out some firepower, doesn't seem like the worst idea. Next up, Gladiator tanks all got another round of cuts. They've dropped twice before, so this is their third points cut since the Codex dropped. The Lancer's down to 150, the Reaper is 180, and the Valiant is 200. As the points cut is the same, the Lancer technically feels it a little bit more, going down 9% compared with the Valiant's 7. Out of the Space Marine tank pool, I would have said that they were some of the stronger options at the moment. In particular, the Reaper firing out all those shots for 180 points is nice, and the Valiant still has decent enough anti-tank. They're probably in the point where they're starting to be tempting to take over Redemptors. Again, maybe depending on whether or not you've got characters spare that might buff the Dreadnoughts, but not these. It seems like there's never really been a better time to field a Reaper or a Valiant at least. They're looking quite strong. For the Land Raiders, they're all down to 245 points, minus 20 points apiece from 265, or a minus 8% drop. This basically confirms that they're not going to be getting any sort of toughness boost like those Chaos Land Raiders got. The Loyalists are going to have to wait for the Codex to get that change. I'd say overall they're probably actually inferior to the Chaos version now. I think I'd rather pay the 20 points and have Toughness 9 and those boosted las cannons. I guess the Loyalists will have to wait till that actual Codex comes out to get their hands on those goodies. Overall though, probably still not worth it until then. The Predator tanks have both gone down a bit as well. The Annihilator's down to 115 base, down 15 points, and the Destructor's down to 130, he's gone down 10. Previously I thought that these were kind of well balanced. The Predator Annihilator getting a much bigger points cut though just puts it squarely ahead in my opinion. I don't imagine that the gun profiles are going to change until Marines get their new Codex, so until then I guess it's las cannons all the way. Again, still not super strong as a firing platform. I feel like the Gladiators are going to outshoot them for the most part and also have toughness 8. The Repulsor and Repulsor Executioner both got some reasonable drops. the Repulsor's down to 270 and the Executioner's down to 300. A 25-point drop on the standard one and a 35-point on the Repulsor Executioner. It's 8% drop on one and 10% on the other. Again, I think it's pretty reasonable, but as they were both some of the weakest options in the Codex before, I still think you're going to be better off with things like Gladiator tanks, never mind things like core firepower platforms. The Vindicator, again, probably isn't getting the Chaos updates. It's down 10 points to 120 or an 8% drop, though I guess most people will likely be fielding it with that Siege Shield. It's particularly good value with Armour of Contempt to give it a 2+ save against ranged attacks. I guess if you just want it to be a durable distraction Carnifex type unit, it'll now do that for even cheaper. Finally, the only flyer that saw a change was the Stormraven gunship, down 30 points to 260 points base, minus 10%, though I don't think that it's going to be worth it at this points cost still. It's just not durable enough at only 14 wounds at toughness 7. A lot of 9th edition firepower will just absolutely wreck it, minus 1 to hit or not. Out of the vehicles, I think quite a lot of them still will remain kind of underwhelming. I'd say maybe out of these selections, perhaps some of the most interesting things are Land Raider Tornadoes. They're decently cheap now. Maybe Fire Strike turrets with auto cannons, which are quite cheap and reasonably durable for the cost. Gladiator Reapers and Valiants, and maybe the Vindicator. I'm not sure that any of these are truly awesomely standout, but all of them kind of getting to be more okay and fine to field, as opposed to just bad. Moving on, let's talk through the Space Marine chapters, then go into the Forge World changes. Starting out, we have the more core Codex type chapters, the ones that didn't used to have standalone codexes. The Ultramarines seem to make out with the single biggest points drops in the entire update. In particular, Mr. Primarch Guilliman himself, he's all the way down to 300 points from 380, an enormous 21% cut. Interestingly, that's making him look like the same points cost and similar abilities to Abaddon, and at 300 points I think he's a lot more interesting again. He certainly hits very hard in melee indeed, and has some of the better buffs in the game. He often rivals Calgar for being the centre of an Ultramarines list. Calgar's also dropped a little bit less, down to 180 points, or minus 30, so Guilliman's arguably got a small leg up on him in terms of efficiency. Still though, I think Calgar's looking like a very reasonable centrepiece for an army. It's quite nice that they both give you command point advantages as well. The Victrix Guard were already kind of efficient, they're now down to 60 points from 70, so Calgar's little bodyguards have also got better. Just for that points cost, they are very durable and hard to shift. Plenty of Ultramarines players already seem to field them, so I guess they're going to be even more tempting for a cheap throwaway tough unit now. Finally, interestingly, Sergeant Telion got the single biggest points cut, at least relatively speaking. He's down all the way to 50 points from 70, or a big 29% drop. I guess though he isn't exactly the character who's going to often do the most. His sniping attack isn't bad, but scouts are kind of rarely fielded at the moment for his voice of experience rule. Then, with the other Space Marine chapters that have only got a few character datasheets as their unique things, the Salamanders made out of it the best. Adrax Agatone and Vulcan Hestan both going down 15 points to 130 and 120 respectively. Adrax really is looking like a bit of a melee beast at that cost, I must admit, and Vulcan does some very interesting buffs with melters. The Imperial Fists have also done kind of well, Lysander and Tor Garadon both going down 10. It's not exactly going to turn the Imperial Fist's fortune around as well, and I would have rated the Salamander's characters as better than them, so I do wonder why they went down more. Ironfather Phyros has dropped 15 to 145. He's never really recovered from being put up loads of points when Iron Hands were super strong in 8th edition. I'd argue that I probably still want things like just Tech Marines or Masters of the Forge even after this cut. Quite a bit of his value is that 5+ invul save aura, which isn't as relevant after Armour of Contempt. Finally, White Scars and Raven Guard get no changes, though to be honest I'm not sure that that's really all that bad a thing. Korsara Khan out of the White Scars is still an enormously efficient character and almost auto-include if you're running them. The Khan on Bike's still good, and Kavan Shrike is nice for the Raven Guard, though I guess it wouldn't have hurt to give him a small boost. Still though, if you wanted to field a Primarch for the Loyalists, then Guilliman is looking better than ever. Moving into the more divergent chapters now, and the Blood Angels have got a whole bunch of good news. Sanguinary Guard were one of the best winners from the Armour of Contempt change, no invul save and 2+ saves, and fast moving and hard hitting. They were already performing pretty well at tournaments. They've got another small points cut, going back down to 30 points again, minus 6%. To be honest, if there was a unit that Blood Angels didn't really need a points cut on, it was probably them, I think you could have argued to reduce just about every other unit before you chose Sanguinary Guard. In any case, as most Blood Angels lists were fielding a bunch of them, then in general that's a lot of free points. Otherwise, the Death Company have done well as well. Standard Death Company have got another points cut, so they're down to 21 points with a jump pack. That's a very meaningful points drop, down 9%, and I think that might be getting to the point where you're tempted to at least take some along to support the Sanguinary Guard as well. Forlorn Fury, if you can spare the command points early in the game with Nephilim, could basically net you a guaranteed first turn charge. A lot of people do like to field the Death Company with some Thunderhammers. Otherwise, for foot troops, Death Company Intercessors are down 2 to 20 points, the same cost as regular Intercessors but with vastly improved stats, both in terms of melee damage and feel no pains. I think they're still going to be a little bit niche though, as they don't move as fast as the jump pack units, and they're still not troops with OBSEC. I think they're not really the worst choice though, just to throw a unit or two in. I feel like they're almost always going to punch a bit above their weight. The Baal Predator is 110 points base now, down 10%, and I don't think that's good enough to actually make it worth it. Tycho the Lost is down 5 points to 95, he costs the same as regular Tycho now, and again I don't really think he's strong enough to be worth including. Blood Angels have a fair few decent buffing characters, and he doesn't even really have that great a melee threat. Finally, Asterath the Grim is down 10 points, he's 140 now. He is kind of interesting as a jump pack Master of Sanctity who can hit very hard with a damage 3 axe, though his litanies are a bit unreliable, not going off on 2s. Overall though, it really is very good news indeed for the Blood Angels. Sanguinary Guard being cut on its own is a massive strength boost. I think Death Company are even more attractive as well. Next up we've got the Black Templars, and they just got the one change to their Primaris Crusader squad. Again, this has had some shenanigans go on with war gear. The base cost is unchanged, 16 points for the Neophyte or 19 for the Initiates, though a lot of war gear became free. The free stuff are the auto-bought rifles, Pyro Pistols, the Sword Brothers axe or sword, and the Power Fist that you can embed in the unit. It's basically mandatory to take Power Fists in the squad I think now. Getting a solid amount of extra anti-tank just included for free is excellent. The entire squad's base cost went down a little bit because now you can field them for 178 points as you don't have to pay for the axe or sword. The ranged option is a choice if you don't want to focus on melee so much, and the Pyre Pistol doesn't hurt for a little bit of close range burning. The only thing that costs points now is the Pyre Blaster, which only costs 5, not too bad as a fairly efficient little flamer. Overall, Black Templar troops are just looking all around stronger, a tiny little bit cheaper on the squad, and they'll hit decently harder in melee with those Power Fists included. Unfortunately, I'm not sure this is the best news for internal Codex balance. The standard Crusader squad was the worst choice already, and now it's even more inferior. The Firstborn just really don't compete against these guys, and the Sword Brethren I think maybe needed help more than the standard Crusaders did. A point or two off them I don't think would have really hurt too much. Dark Angels again have got a fair smattering of points value changes. I'd say the most exciting ones are 2 Black Knights and Deathwing Knights. The Ravenwing Elites got their Corvus Hammers go free. Previously they costed 40 points if you wanted to take their melee weapons, and I think that you usually would want to, as they're an extra +1 strength, AP -1 and damage 2. Makes the squad into a bit more of a dual threat rather than just plasma spam. If you were running the hammers, then that's a fairly sizable buff, -12% down to 35. Really quite nice, as I thought they were a bit borderline before. I think this is going to put them into the territory of being fairly worth it. Deathwing Knights got a similar nice cut. They now cost 43 points, the same as Thunderhammer and Stormshield Terminators, basically making them the choice that you'd usually want to go for over them, as they cost the same but hit far harder in melee, with their maces not having any -1 to hit and also hitting on 2s. I guess they don't get the objective secured rule, but you potentially could get them that with Rites of War. I think it's quite a nice change as well to help keep them competitive with the Armour of Contempt Terminators. Bearing Storm Shields, these guys don't really get any benefit from that rule. I think there's really not a lot of elite infantry or hard targets that are going to be able to beat them in a fight now, particularly not if you can get a bit of psychic on the go and get 4 rerolls to hit and wound. Otherwise, the other core unit changes were the Dark Shroud and Landspeeder Vengeance. Both of those dropped down 10 points. The Dark Shroud's down to 120 for its -1 to hit aura, and the Landspeeder Vengeance is down to 110 for its plasma spam. I'd probably say that the Vengeance is still the more interesting of the two. The Dark Shroud isn't bad for the -1 to hit, but I think you do have to keep it hidden and play quite carefully with it. Finally, the HQ changes are pretty unexpected, though welcome to Dark Angels players. 2 of the best HQ slots went down, Azrael dropping to 160 points, and Ezekiel dropping down to 115. Azrael's just pretty good all around. He gives that nice 4+ invul save to nearby infantry, which is pretty relevant. It's not too bad in melee, brings Chapter Master rerolls, a good Warlord trait, and 2 CP, which is a lot more relevant in Nephilim. So he was a tempting pick before, and he's even more so now. Ezekiel as well though, he was absolutely great. A really common competitive staple in Dark Angel's lists, casting multiple powers from Interromancy and getting +1 to cast when he did so, without having to pay for Chief Librarian upgrades. Just about every second list tended to run him, and now I think that that's only going to increase. Interromancy is awesome, stripping OBSEC, fighting last, and 4 rerolls to hit in combat, among other things. Finally, the Deathwing upgrades, the Rites of the Initiation, all got 5 points cheaper. Most of these don't really do all that much rules-wise, besides maybe allow you to include those units in a Deathwing Vanguard detachment. I still don't think that most people will want to use these unless they have to, but I guess if it makes sense detachment-wise, then it's a little bit less of a tax. Overall, I'd say it's a small buff to Dark Angels. In particular, Azrael and Ezekiel will help out a lot of lists, and the rest of the units maybe catch up a little bit on the core staples of the army. Deathwatch next, and again it was fairly light touch with the changes. As best I can tell, the only actual main change to the army came to Kill Team Cassius, which has dropped down to 240 points, equivalent to an 8% cut. These guys didn't tend to be taken competitively all that very often. They do have a pretty annoying mix of war gear, which make them not really suited to any one role, but it is quite fun that they get all that war gear quite discounted compared with how much it would cost to buy it in individually. Overall, they do just seem all round fun really. Say if you did field a 10-man kill team, it would usually be around about 200 points anyway, even just at base without gear. Upgrading 40 points to upgrade to these guys with their big collection of stuff could be fun. They're a lot more tempting now, and the models really are quite nice ones. Otherwise, the kill team specialisms all cost 5 points less now. They're the ones that give you rerolls against a certain battlefield role, or potentially allow you stratagems to make those rerolls better. You might consider them a little bit more as just a general upgrade to make your squad good at killing certain things. In particular, the Deathwatch Army of Renown will like this quite a lot, as you do have to buy in those specialisms. Overall, not really the biggest buff to Deathwatch though. I suppose things like objective secured Outriders will be a little bit cheaper, just from the core codex decreases. Lastly, for the chapters, before we get into Forge World stuff, we have the Space Wolves. Again, mirroring the Assault Marine change, Skyclaws seem to have done very well indeed out of this. They already hit a little bit harder than standard Assault Marines, getting +1 attack from Berserk Charge, and now they are looking like a genuine alternative to Jump Pack Wolfguard. The base loadout dropped 2 points to just 18 points for a fast and fairly hard-hitting infantry blender unit, plus again, like the Assault Marines, basically all their gear is either cheaper or free. The Wolfguard pack leader stuff still costs points, but it means you could throw in a couple of plasma pistols if you wanted to. The Hounds of Morkai also drops down to 20 points, -2 points or -9%. They're the dedicated psychic hunting reavers who get a bunch of special rules to basically counter enemy psychers. They can ignore psychic powers and things, so can shrug off some smites and stuff. I guess it depends on just how many mortal wounds are throwing around in the meta. They're a pretty reasonable choice against things like Grey Knights, Thousand Suns or Tyranids. I guess it depends on how often you see those as to whether or not they're going to be worth buying in. Otherwise, the Stormfang and Stormwolf gunships both dropped 30 points. They're now 250 points each, or -11%. Again, with the Stormraven, I think that they're an expensive option for the durability that they have. I'd say probably the Stormfang is still my favourite, the gunship variant, and it's probably more efficient than the Stormraven in my opinion. Finally, a trio of characters went down. Arjak Rockfist, Canis Wolfborn, and Harold Deathwolf. They all dropped 10 points. They perhaps mainly weren't my favourite choices before. Perhaps Arjak is the single most interesting one out of those. He is pretty mighty both in terms of damage and defense. Overall, perhaps not the biggest changes for Space Wolves. Most of the units that they wanted to take kind of remain the same. Skyclaws I think are an interesting option to add to the lineup. Maybe not quite as many buffs compared with things like Blood Angels or Dark Angels. Finally, we have the Forge World units, and it is interesting that Games Workshop are actually updating these a bit. They often get neglected in these sort of balance passes, but lots of stuff did go down. I'd say maybe the biggest and most interesting change is to the Astrius. That's dropped 50 points down to 550, equivalent to an 8% buff. I think that's quite a nice change, and you'll feel less bad about running one now. In particular, a few Iron Hands lists already seem to be running these and putting all their synergies on them, things like +1 to their saves or +1 to hit. It does cost an awful lot, but it can be very hard to shift with Armour of Contempt now. It definitely feels a lot more usable, and you won't even have to pay a command point for it anymore, as the Lord of War slot is free if you've got a Space Marine Warlord. Another relevant one is the Spartan, going down to 420 points. It's the Quad Lascan Land Raider that's going to be coming out in the Horus Heresy box. I think a lot of people will have these, so making them a bit less feels bad to field on the table is very nice. Unfortunately, for its defense, I still think it is rather pricey for what it does. Again, maybe it could be an interesting one to put things like Iron Hands buffs on. At least it is a bit of a Land Raider that sort of feels like a Land Raider, as it's not going to get locked up in combat due to being a Lord of War. Still though, point for point, it's got far weaker defense than even standard Land Raiders, and I'm not sure that's the most amazing place to be in. Otherwise, a whole bunch of things went down. Javelin Landspeeders dropped to 115, Landspeeder Tempest to 110, the Land Raider Achilles dropped 30 to 270, and the Proteus drops down to 220. Again, the Proteus is kind of interesting, as it's going to be one of the new Horus Heresy kits. It still doesn't look like it's going to compete amazingly with the standard Land Raider though, plus it does have a CP cost as it is a relic. Otherwise, getting into bigger, badder tanks, the Cerberus is down to 370, the Great Big Space Marine Falchion is 550, similar to the Baneblade but for Space Marines. The Mastodon loses 50, and the Typhon is down to 320. All of them are decent points changes in the right direction, but I don't think that any of them are really going to get to the point where they're going to be tempting over the standard smaller datasheets in the Codex. In particular, things like Gladiator tanks I think are just going to be better than them if you take their equivalent weight in points. Overall, I'd say the Astrius is probably the biggest winner, and the Spartan's interesting as a lot of people might be picking up the model. So overall, it's a rather comprehensive series of buffs for Space Marines, although I must admit most of them do tend to target things that don't see as much play at the moment, so might not have quite as much impact on competitive lists as you might expect. For generic choices, I think actually my favourite changes are probably to the Assault Squad, Eliminators, and maybe the Outriders. Eliminators with Las Fusils for 75 points just seem pretty efficient. Assault Squads are nice for objectives and things. And Outriders, I think people will be very happy to put back on the board. Lots of people have those from the starter kits. For the vehicles, cheap Gladiator Reapers I think are looking lovely. And within the Space Marine chapters, I think Guilliman and Calgar are looking quite standout, as are those Victrix Honor Guard. Blood Angels have done great with Sanguinary Guard and Death Company. The Black Templar battle line is looking far stronger. And I'd say that Dark Angels, Space Wolves and Deathwatch all had small changes, but I guess they're broadly helpful. In any case, it's looking like a fairly decent time to be in Astartes, and bear in mind that as well as these scattered buffs, a lot of the top armies have got a fair few nerfs, so hopefully Space Marines will be looking pretty solid after this. I do feel that Blood Angels might actually be looking like one of the strongest chapters now. Armour of Contempt and these changes are doing great. In any case, let me know what you think down in the comments. Also let me know if I missed anything. I will try and put a pinned comment up there if there are any changes that I've not spotted. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly try and make a similar video for just about every one of the factions after the points changes. It's going to be interesting to see what's got good and what's been hit with nerfs. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description. Making all the videos like this does take an awful lot of time and effort, so if you are enjoying a lot, any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.